The wonderful thing about the Voynich manuscript is that one day it will be translated and everyone will be proven wrong. Theories and hypotheses come cheap when it comes to the Voynich manuscript. The manuscript itself will have the last laugh. Here I put forward an altogether outlandish solution to the mystery. I don't think it's obvious. I think it's unlikely. I just happen to think it may be right. I propose, in short, that the Voynich manuscript was written on the Saben mountain in Sabiona, in the County Tyrol, the bishopric of Brixen in northern Italy, sometime in the middle of the 1400s or a bit later. In particular, I propose the work is connected with the Church of the Holy Cross at that location. The author is very likely to have been an educated man at that location. The name that emerges in that context is Nicholas of Cusa. I'm not proposing that Nicholas of Cusa was the direct author, but I am proposing that it is a work associated with him, and that the work might be meaningfully described as Cusian under the influence of Nicholas of Cusa. Nicholas of Cusa was appointed Prince Bishop of Brixen in 1450, with the Saben mountain and the Cathedral of the Holy Cross the historic centre of his bishopric. He remained there for 6 or so years. I propose that the Voynich manuscript was written during that time or shortly after. As for the central enigma, the Voynich language, I can only conclude that it has been crafted by Cusian philosophical principles and is in some way a philosophical creation. All the same, the language in the background of the plain text is, I maintain, Ladin, the vulgar Latin remnant, a Rhaeto-Romance tongue surviving in the Alpine valleys of that region. The manuscript concerns and gives a humanist Christian rendering of the herbal and folklore traditions of the Ladin people from the Alpine highlands and remote valleys, in particular the regions centred on the Rosengarten Mountains. It is about that region, those people, and their folklore. But it is a humanist Christian account of that tradition, and specifically under the influence of the Christian humanism of Nicholas of Cusa. The connection with Nicholas of Cusa is that Saben mountain, the holy mountain, was a sacred place for the Ladin people of the Alpine valleys. The Church of the Holy Cross was their place of pilgrimage. To this day, every 3 years, the menfolk of the high valleys, Ladin speakers, march an ancient route through the mountains to Saben on pilgrimage. The place is called Javun in the Ladin language. For hundreds of years, the Bishop of Brixen resided on Saben mountain, so the Ladin pilgrimage was to the seat of their bishop. The residency of the bishopric was moved to nearby Bolzano, but the Ladin pilgrimage to Saben was maintained. It was a connection to their ancient roots. Saben was the site of the first Roman settlement, and the Ladin were descended from Roman soldiers and their families who settled the region after subduing the Rhaetons in the 1st century BC. Subsequently, the cathedral there was their primal connection to Roman Christianity. In any case, for a period of years in the mid-1400s, Nicholas of Cusa was the bishop of that region and bishop over the Ladin minorities for whom the ancient bishopric was their sacred centre. I propose that the Voynich manuscript is the product of that encounter, the ancient Ladin herb tradition with the Christian humanist perspectives of Nicholas of Cusa. This is, I admit, a strange hybrid, a strange coming together, but not implausible, and the manuscript itself is quite obviously a strange hybrid. I propose that this is the unlikely scenario that produced such an unlikely outcome. It is, in any case, historically and geographically possible. Considering the whole manuscript, the entire ensemble, illustrations, text, everything, I detect the herb tradition of the Lardin and a Christian humanism. Nicholas of Cusa was in that place at that time, and his distinctive Christian humanism might conceivably match what we find in the manuscript. That combination in that context might account for the manuscript such as it is. Regarding the identification of the Lardin herbal tradition, a recent study published in an ethnobotanical journal reported this, quote, "Worldwide mountain regions are recognised as hotspots of ethnopharmacologically relevant species diversity. In South Tyrol, Southern Alps, Italy, due to the region's high plant diversity and isolated population, a unique traditional botanical knowledge of medicinal herbs has flourished, which traces its history back to prehistoric times." Unquote. I am firmly of the view that this unique and ancient tradition is what is depicted in the Voynich manuscript. It is a herb-gathering tradition with an accompanying folk medicine based upon the rich and unique botany of the Alpine regions. This, I maintain, is what we see in the Voynich manuscript. But as well as this, notably we also see the nymph lore peculiar to the Lardin people of exactly that region. These things very particularly point to the Lardin. Yet we should not imagine some rustic herb gatherer from the remote valleys composing the Voynich manuscript in his hut by candlelight. The Lardin people, in truth, lived a very harsh, rustic existence in those mountain valleys. There was no one in those communities with the required skills. I propose, rather, that it was written at Saben, and that Saben, especially the Church of the Holy Cross, is the point at which the oral folk tradition of the Lardin made its remarkable transition onto vellum in the form that we find it. Or rather, it was written in the context of the Lardin pilgrimage to Saben and the Church of the Holy Cross. Saben is the mountain people's point of contact with the world of literacy and education, and not just a regional or commercial education. In the manuscript we see evidence of the humanist hand and of a complex astrology, and the text, whatever it might be, a language or a cipher, is a creation of considerable sophistication. This rustic herb tradition has been rendered by an educated and adept mind. Look at the illustrations. Rustic, folkish, cartoonish. Look at the style of writing. The humanist hand says cultured, educated in the Greco-Roman classics, elite. The place where the herbal tradition of the Lardin would encounter humanist learning would be in Saben, a necessary ongoing contact because of the obligations of pilgrimage. Pilgrimage draws the elders of the Lardin communities down from their mountain valleys. I believe that the Voynich map has to do with pilgrimage, and that pilgrimage is one of the themes of the work. Indeed, I think the work presents a thoroughly Christian version of the Lardin tradition, but along with elements of classical learning such as defined the humanist movement. The Christian cosmology displayed in the manuscript specifically concerns the phenomenon of the alpenglow that illuminates the Rossengarten mountains as the light of Christ. That is the key to understanding it. That is, this is understood in terms of Christian humanism, which is to say Christian symbolism informed by Greco-Roman models. As it happens, the relevant humanism is the philosophy of Nicholas of Cusa. He is a unique, considerable, capable, even profound mind, resident as Bishop of the Lardin for a period of years. He is a major and influential thinker, a pioneer of Christian humanism. I propose that someone has wanted to give a thoroughly Christian account of the Lardin tradition and have used Cusa's philosophy as the means of doing so. They are within his circle, or influenced by him, or tutored by him, connected to him, or his school of thought. More exactly, though, I must propose that some group of people are behind this project, because it is a consolidating of material from several related sources. I see this most likely in the context of the pilgrimage to Saben. As I read it, the map is the key to the Voynich manuscript, and was likely to have been a separate composition. The manuscript is a compilation of material relevant to that map, which is the centerpiece. It is an ensemble, an assembly. Several bodies of material have been assembled around the map, which by design is a pilgrimage map, but of the mountain pilgrimages of the Lardin. There is further background, though. I propose further that the need to give a Christian conforming account of the Lardin tradition was the looming phenomenon of the witch hunts, which emerged in these regions only decades later. This is the opposite trend to Christian humanism. The position of the Lardin was increasingly problematic. They preserved, in fact, a pre-Christian folklore and language. Beginning in the 1400s, this was demonised, and their homeland, the valleys near the Rosengarten Mountains, was characterised as witch-infested. It is important to appreciate that the witch hunt hysteria that swept Europe began exactly here, in the Italian Alps. I propose that, against the rising darkness, the need arose to place the Lardin within a Christian framework. That is the situation that provoked the work in the first place, the predicament, the motivation. I'm certain in any case that the looming witch hunts that began in this region, specifically concerning the Lardin, are not unimportant or unrelated. And they stand in contrast to the spread of humanist learning in the same period. Here is the enlightened Christian Neoplatonism of Nicholas of Cusa, and yet the notorious witch hunter's manual, the Malus Maleficarum, was first published not far away, only a few years later. Indeed, the story behind that infamous text is entirely in line with my scenario. Heinrich Kramer had attempted to institute witch hunts in South Tyrol, in the bishopric of Brixen, but had met with no success, so he went north to Germany and demonised the Lardin from there. There was a question over the nature of the ancient pre-Christian remnant communities of the mountain valleys and their strange folklore and herbal potions. Kramer portrayed it as a malignant witchcraft. In the Voynich manuscript, we see it presented as compatible with Christian philosophy. As it happens, Cusa's time as bishop there was not uncomplicated, and was in fact difficult, and there were many people who resisted his reforms. But we cannot suppose that he made no impression on the intellectual culture there during and probably long after his time. I am supposing that someone, or some people, contra the demonisations of the witch hunters, understood the Lardin tradition in terms of a Christian cosmology developed from Cusa's teachings. The Voynich manuscript is a record of the same. But this is where it gets interesting. I'm led to propose, that the language and script in the manuscript is itself Cusian in its very structure. I propose it is founded structurally upon Nicholas of Cusa's philosophical distinction between a curve and a line, the finite and the infinite. The script is built on this primal binary. It is at the heart of the philosophy of Nicholas of Cusa. It is a fingerprint of Cusian thinking. There is a work by Nicholas of Cusa to which the Voynich manuscript might conceivably answer. I can only sketch a case for such a reading here. The work is the Idiota de Staticus Experimentus, an odd little work entitled The Layman on Experiments Done with Weight Scales. It is a dialogue between a Roman orator and a layman, that is to say, between an educated man and an uneducated man, the common man, the layman, idiota. Presumably Nicholas of Cusa is the Roman orator, the man educated in Roman rhetoric. The tract begins, the Roman orator used to visit with the layman in order on occasion to learn of his ideas which the orator found pleasing. So the scenario presented in this work is of Nicholas of Cusa, the Roman orator, visiting a layman because he takes an interest in the ideas of the common man. Strangely, the text concerns weighing, measuring all the things of nature, using the common device of the weight scales as a means of conducting experiments. What is measured in the end is the density of the elements, fire, air, water and earth, in the things of nature, according to the parameters of Cusian cosmology. Everything is explained in these terms: herbs, stars, the zodiac. The protagonists in the discourse agree that all of this needs to be written down in a book. The track ends, and I quote, the orator says, "You have now explained sufficiently the reasons why you wish for the weights of things to be measured by means of weight scale, and to be recorded both serially and multiply. For indeed, we see that that book would be very useful, and we see that the undertaking of it by great men ought to be urged, so that in different provinces experimental weights would be registered and would be collected into one book, so that we would more readily be brought to many things that are now hidden to us. And I will not cease everywhere to promote it being done." And the layman says, "If you care for me, then be diligent in this task. Farewell." I underline, so that in different provinces experimental weights would be registered and would be collected into one book, so that we would more readily be brought to many things that are now hidden to us. I suggest that the Voynich manuscript might specifically answer to that notice. It is an application of the Cusian cosmology to a particular province, registered and collected into one book. This strange little tract by Nicholas of Cusa, it's actually part of a series of short dialogues, might prefigure the Voynich manuscript, which in turn is written in conformity to it. The Voynich manuscript, that is, seems a bit like a collaboration of a Roman orator with the layman, the humanist scholar and the idiota, the cardinal and the farmer, the cosmopolitan and the yokel, the academic and the illiterate. Look at those cartoonish illustrations, folkish and rustic, yet the humanist styled hand, the engineered script, that remarkable language, that extraordinary linguistic creation. A cipher? I don't know that Nicholas of Cusa had an active interest in ciphers and codes like many other humanist polymaths. Mathematics, certainly. But he was a papal diplomat at the highest level and travelled widely on papal business and was routinely involved in papal intrigues, such as they were. And so I assume he was acquainted with using ciphers as a diplomatic norm, at very least. More likely, the text seems in some way a philosophical language, like an invented language with a systematic lexicon, in which case in some way expressing or embodying principles of Cusian philosophy. This would be altogether remarkable in its period, but then Nicholas of Cusa was a remarkable figure in the period. It seems to me that what we have is an account of the Lardin herbal tradition seen through Cusian eyes, expressed in the very distinct philosophy of Nicholas of Cusa. I'm fully aware that every article of this account needs to be argued in detail and demands an abundance of evidence. I only offer it as a proposal here, but it is where, for me, the trail leads. It is not by any means an obvious solution, but the shape of it, in context, leads me there. It is a contextual approach. Unless we can place the Voynich manuscript in its proper context, we will never be in a position to understand it. I'm not at all happy with this outcome. I resist it. Surely there is a simpler and more coherent explanation. But these are considered conclusions, and it is the simplest account I can give for what has happened. In a strange hybrid like the Voynich manuscript, which presents so many conceptual conundrums, we must expect the unexpected. The narrative I offer is roughly as follows. The Lardin people of the remote alpine valleys in northern Italy have a very ancient oral tradition of herb gathering and folk medicine, along with pre-Christian folklore concerning the nymphs of the mountains. They have been Christianized in late Roman times, with their spiritual centre, the Saben mountain, the seat and cathedral of their bishop. While they retained their pre-Christian folklore, they necessarily had a Christian cosmology in which the alpenglow, central to their legends, was assimilated as the light of Christ. In the mid-1400s, this pre-Christian remnant was increasingly cast as a bed of witchcraft. But in the mid-1400s in South Tyrol, Nicholas of Cusa, the great Christian humanist and Neoplatonist with a unique philosophy, was made Bishop of Brixen. The hybrid we call the Voynich manuscript is an account of the Lardin law cast in terms of that philosophy. I propose it is the outcome of that context. I think that might be what we find when all is revealed.